This is episode 15, and in this episode I'll share with you a stress management toolkit that in my new self-care book I call the Dopamine Bank. This is a mental health emergency preparedness stress management tool full of things and activities that you know will make you feel calm and at peace, and having it readily available to use when those stressful events enter your life when you least expect it. See, no one likes feeling sad, depressed, or worried, or full of anxiety. When these feelings enter our lives when we least expect it, we have two options. One, we can either allow these negative emotions to take control and continue to cause us to feel down, or two, we can take control and regulate the physiological changes happening in our body as we experience these difficult thoughts and emotions. You see, when we have these feelings, the sympathetic nervous system, which is also known as your fight, flight, or freeze system, is active. In episode 9, we discussed that during the time of sadness, worry, and stress, there's a release of stress hormones. And at the same time, there's a reduction of the neurotransmitters called dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. These are the feel-good neurotransmitters. And if you recall in previous episodes, you learned that neurotransmitters, these are chemical messengers influencing certain processes occurring in the brain. And dopamine is one of those key neurotransmitters that is being released when you're feeling happiness and feeling a sense of overall well-being. We all have within us the capability to turn off the release of the stress hormones and influence the natural release of the feel-good hormone called dopamine. See, dopamine is known as the feel-good hormone, and it's associated with pleasure, memory, and motor function. When we're doing something we enjoy, dopamine is being released. We are motivated and rewarded via the good feeling dopamine creates when participating in activities we enjoy. During a stressful, sad, and anxious situation, sometimes people use drugs or alcohol to cope with these feelings and to numb the negative emotions as a form of temporary relief. Now, a healthier option is to access the natural good-feeling hormone of dopamine anytime we want and to avoid the negative consequences of these harmful relaxants and stimulants. This is where your dopamine bank, full of activities and things that influence the release of dopamine, comes into play. To harness the power of natural-made dopamine, we must first prepare by identifying the activities and memories we know that make us feel happy and calm. Then place these activities in what I call your dopamine bank. To identify these activities and memories, reflect on past experiences where you felt calm, happy, and at peace. Think of songs or motivational videos that every time you listen to them, you feel calm, motivated, safe, and happy. For example, ever since I was a small boy, every time I would watch a Rocky Balboa training montage, I would get chills. I'd feel motivated and wanted to work out. And I just get all this motivation and good feeling because that was a release of dopamine. You see, there are certain playlists I have readily available that are in my dopamine bank. They're full of songs that always make me feel calm. In fact, I have an Amazon playlist now called DB, or my dopamine bank. I listen to these songs, and when I listen to them, they trigger a release of dopamine. Just help me feel calm when I'm in tough situations. Also within your dopamine bank, you could have things such as affirmations or quotes, or simply reflecting on past joyful events. What goes in each of your dopamine banks differs because the brain has been trained in the past to release dopamine to make you feel relaxed based on these activities, and only you can reflect and identify what these are. Now, what goes into each of your dopamine banks differ because the brain has been trained in the past to release dopamine, making you feel relaxed based on those activities that have previously released the most amount of dopamine when you experienced that activity in the past. Dr. Ryback, a psychologist at Harvard University, says that over time, as you engage in these activities repetitively, the brain becomes accustomed to the good feeling of accomplishing a repetitive goal or activity, and the desire to continue the activity increases. And your brain becomes trained and accustomed to release dopamine every time you engage in that same activity. My challenge for you this week is to first prepare your dopamine bank and have them readily accessible. You want to have them readily accessible so when that moment of sadness or worry and stress enters your life when you least expect it, you can have these items in your dopamine bank readily to use to reduce the releases of the stress hormones and increase the release of the dopamine, resulting in that emergency sense of well-being. The dopamine bank becomes your emergency preparedness toolkit to access those things that help you feel calm when you're under the most amount of stress. So I challenge you to create your dopamine bank, and then I challenge you to test out your dopamine bank and update it routinely with new items you know make you feel good. This concludes this episode. Please tune in every Monday for a new self-care tip. If you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor and share it with your family and friends. You can also learn more about this topic on my website at utah23.org. Also, please check out my self-care book titled Self-Health Andragogy, Self-Directed Learning Approach to Mental and Physical Self-Care. You can find links to my website and my new book in the show notes of this podcast.